Listeners of the Randomness of Nothing podcast, this is your host, Rashad Woods. Now, I have always had the pleasure of talking to successful people, but this is about as good as it gets for me because I do this show for a specific reason, and that is to inspire people to reach the highest of heights. And it starts with you and your heart within. And it's your motivation, your drive, and it's the things you do when people aren't looking that matter the most. I have the modern day mystic, entrepreneur, IT savant, Peter Sacco. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Rashad. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the show, and I know we just had a few minutes to talk a little bit in the green room, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. And I got to be honest with you, with all the busy things you could do, the fact that you wanted to, something called you to want to be on here with you and your team, I'm very grateful for it. So let's get right into your background, if that's okay.
Yep. Sure.
So
yeah, it started fairly traditional. I grew up, I'm 58, right? So that's going to set everything. I was born in 1967, right? So May 4th was special to me, right? Because I was, I felt like George Lucas made Star Wars just for me. I was 10 years old. And I got to be honest, and so what I'm proud about is here my grandson Luca turned 3 yesterday, so he's a Star Wars baby, and I promise I'm working towards something here. So
it's all good.
It's a big deal for me, and so I wanted to share that with you. So I created the modern
awesome.
myth of the. There you go. So. May he be a Jedi like his father and his grandfather before him. And so I was born in 67, northern New Jersey, a town called Lodi. And I grew up playing football, right? I was always a big kid. And when I was done playing football after, injury, I got really big and started my own company for the first time, right? I started working in the defense industry. So my background was as a theoretical physicist, right?
Wow.
Training school-wise, switched to engineering after I got hurt, finished my football career, finished my engineering degree, went to work in the defense industry, designing power supplies and DC to DC converters during the first 2 Gulf Wars.
Wow.
That led to UPS design, uninterruptible power supply design, which is a key component inside the data center. And that's really when, at some point I started my own company. My father was an entrepreneur in the mortgage industry. I was married for the first time pretty young at 27. And my father-in-law owned a very large trucking company. And so I had entrepreneurial training. DNA. Right. Right from the beginning. And so I started my company, PTS Data Center Solutions, almost 30 years ago now. And today, we are at the forefront of designing and building the data centers that are today powering AI.
It's funny. Right? I was going to talk to you about that because I was like, you're ahead of the curve,
Dude, I'm the luckiest guy in the world, right? I mean, if you'd have told me, 20 years ago that today I'd be playing with the cool kids again in the world of AI in the one industry, I'd have told you were crazy, right? Yeah. Life, we plan and God smiles, right? And so, that's the best we can hope to do. But, you keep moving forward, right? When I wrote, you can't see it on the camera, but there's a book over my shoulder. A few years ago, I wrote this book, Living in Bliss. It's really the cathartic tale of me. I like to say that I really hit my stride late in life, right? That book tells the story that even as an entrepreneur, right, that I had all the things that you think would line up to say, hey, that's the guy, right? I had a business. I was married, right? I had a son. I had, a nice house and all the things that you would want. But man, I was miserable. And I woke up one day, I was 370 pounds and, I was estranged from my son. I wasn't very happily married. The business began to struggle and I realized I something had to give, right? And so today I call it the framework that I created, that we need to commit, learn, and then do. So I committed at that point in my life, this was in my late 30s, early 40s, I committed that I was the architect of both everything good and everything bad in my life. And that I could continue to go down that path, or I can change myself to improve the world around me. And that's basically what, then I learned everything about what did that take? What did it really take to be, to make a successful business? And I've got lots of mentors that have been there, from people like Vistage, the Vistage community and the strategic coach community. And so I learned all along the way. I learned that it's an all-in thing, body, mind, really and spirit, right? Really so first I fixed the body. Then I learned I can mold the mind, and the spirit came as by accident, but I'm happy it did. But it changed everything for me, because today, 190 pounds. I've got I got divorced. I got remarried. I've got, at the ripe old age of 58, I've got 3 little girls, 8, 6, and soon to be 4. I've got my son, and he's got 12, 9. A 3-year-old, my grandson, which I just shared, and then one on the way. And then the business today, I've evolved from not just being the CEO of that company today, but I own probably, I am private equity wise, I own about 4 companies right now. Venture capital, I've got 7 others or 8 others that I'm a limited partner in, all around the data center and the AI industry, right? That's my investment thesis. I mean, this is the most profound technology, AI, that man has ever wrought. And so I would love to dig into that, because it's really at the cornerstone of every, from where I go to what I think the future of mankind is going to be.
Well, I think the beauty about it is that you were ahead of the curve, because now it's the niche, but what people have to understand, just briefly, for people who are scared of AI, I would challenge you to remember that spell checking was artificial intelligence on your first Windows computer, back in the 90s, when you're like, man, that's the life-saving, changing thing I always needed. Well, that was AI. Those song recommendations in your Pandora or your XM radio, that's AI. The movie recommendations on your streaming service, so you can always pick up to your next television show or program, that's AI. I think people turned into Luddites. And for people who don't know what Luddites are, they were the textile workers in England that smashed the textile machines
during the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that people have to understand that you embrace it, and then you find out how to make it a tool to make you more valuable in this ever-changing technology.
I tell everybody, all of my employees and people that I coach and however, AI is not going to take your job. The person who comes to me and knows how to do your job with your experience, but also knows how to utilize all of the AI tools to eliminate the mundane from what they need to do, that's the person that's going to take your job. So this is the inflection point for humankind. We all are going to have to go back to school and learn this new tool. To your point with technology, every generation is defined by the technology that it grows up with. Right. Correct. That's existed for all time. You can go back to Gutenberg and his printing press, and you can say that, the critics at the time said, spreading the word, right, was going to spread heresy and chaos, but it didn't. Yeah. It democratized knowledge for the first time. Yes. Right. And ultimately it led to the era known as Enlightenment. Right. And so it democratized knowledge for the first time for other than the elite. Yes. And we were better off for that. You mentioned the Industrial Revolution, right? And that led to the rise of millions of people out of poverty. Yes. We said the same thing about television, right? It was going to rot the light bulb. The internet was going to rot our brain, right? But in every case, these technologies, they didn't fail humanity. They allowed us to thrive in ways that we at the time did not understand. This technology is actually the most profound. This is the technology at the hockey stick moment in time that is going to lead to a post-scarcity world, a world where everything, your basic needs, all of your basic services are going to be provided for. Right. Do we know how that's going to take place right now? No. Will we figure it out? Yes. Just like we always have throughout human history. And like we were talking about in the green room, the greatest obstacle isn't going to be, agents and robots taking man's job. It's going to be, what do we do when we realize for the first time that we are in sole responsibility for defining our meaning, that our meaning does not have to be tied up in how smart we are, what skills we've taught ourselves, and how much we think we could sell for ourselves on the marketplace. when we truly have to answer to only one person, ourselves,
Right.
are we going to be authentic to ourselves and
Absolutely.
realize that life, my meaning, is tied purely on how good I could make this mind, body, self? I can't change anybody in life.
Nope.
I can't change you. I can't change my kids. I can't change my workers. I have one responsibility to myself and to the world to make this guy the best possible Pete Sacco I possibly can. And if that is reflective on those that are close to me, my children, my wife, my family, my friends, great. But if not, that's their decision, right?
Absolutely.
I will then have to make a decision. Can I live with that in my life, or do I need to cut them loose, right? And so, but if I accept them into my life, I have to accept them with all their flaws. And that's really hard for us to do.
Yeah, and I think that too, that when people start realizing that they've been conditioned for a long time, and it's almost like now we're going to uncondition all those things that said they kept you busy. And then you're going to find out whether or not you have skills, whether or not there's an old saying, don't mistake a habit for hard work. Right.
Yeah.
So did you just have a habit of doing certain things, but was it the most smart and efficient way of doing things? And then people have to understand the second stool to this is that companies and businesses, while you're thinking in the moment, they're always thinking 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ahead. So if you're not updating your skill set, if you're not redefining who you are, if you're not talking to people who are at the forefront of things early, like yourself, you were doing data centers 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You saw something in technology that said this will be useful to people, because that's really when like America Online was getting big. That's when Amazon started really like coming out. And there was something inside of those people such as yourself that said, I don't know where this is right now, but I know at some point this is going to be very important for people to want to use. And now it's just
we
part
have to
of
remain
life.
flexible. Dude, I remember when I lived through this the first time. I remember the first time I saw email, I looked at it and I'm like, this is never going to fly, right? Nobody will ever use this. And right, you couldn't be more wrong. And today, I'm completely embracing of the new technologies and where we're going. I mean, look, I'm 58 years old. Most of my friends that I played tennis with on a regular, they're around in third base, right? Looking at home plate, ready to slide in because they're done. I feel like I'm just getting started. Right? Yeah. We're going to be the first generation, my generation, Generation X, that not just doesn't outlive our parents, we're going to far outlive our parents, right? Because of this AI revolution in healthcare and all of the things that's going to take. Like we were talking about, right now, I'm building a personal brand just like you are, looking for this. Why? I've got companies, I've got this, because here's what I recognize. The future workforce is going to be a coddled together array of independent contractors. And you as an independent contractor are going to have to sell yourself on the, for the time being, what are the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that you could deliver value to not just one company, but perhaps multiple companies. And then everything else, you're going to use your agents and your robots to solve in your life to get rid of the mundane, right? And so that you could focus on, and like I was telling you earlier, if I had something to share, the first thing is to identify what are your superpowers? What are the things that you're good at? And I don't mean good at, I mean, they just came naturally to you. You didn't have to train them. You don't have to completely go back to the well. They give you great happiness. So you love doing them. So you do that. Look, I was reasonably successful before I discovered that, but I really turned the tide when I realized the 5 things for me that I was really good at. And then I embody that inside everything that I do. And if there's something that falls outside of that, I give it to somebody else who does it better than I do, that's in my inner circle, right? There was a famous book by a guy, Dan Sullivan, who I've had the pleasure to meet. I've been in strategic coach for a long time, right? And Dan wrote the book, Who Not How. Right. If you can't do it, if you don't know how to do it, you have to hire a who. Right. And so I learned that, I'm a really good learner, and then integrating it into my life. I'm a really good concentrator and focuser. Right. When I need to put my head down and get something done. I'm a really good facilitator. I have the ability to make the really complex simpler to understand and break it down. Right. I have, and 5 others. I'm a visionary, right? Well, I'm a CEO. That's a good thing. And I'm an old dad too. So that helps as well, right? Those are the things that you have to learn what are your strengths so that you can leverage them as you're defining what your core values are, right? Because that's their core values. Who are you and what do you want to become? And then you have to use that as your milestones, your guideposts. And every time you find yourself out of that guideposts, you got to remind yourself, am I purposefully doing this? And if not, then I got to steer myself back into my guideposts.
Well, this is why this show was created, because I would challenge people that when you start venturing into that half-ass venture that you did, it's because it wasn't authentically you. Because, the reality about it is, it's like I saw a commercial where a woman turned old clothes, shredded them, and then turned them into new clothes. And that's because you're passionate about textile. So while you saw trash that you were throwing away, that tattered shirt, she saw a new process that could be improved upon and said, listen, there is something else behind this that can be utilized to make this successful. And so when we talk about your companies, like, you founded PTS in 1998. Yeah. What was that like at the very beginning, when it really started going all in on digital?
I would love to sit here and say I had the grand vision, right? But that's not how it is. Like, right? We plan and God smiles, right? I woke up one day, I was working in the defense industry and I was just happy as a clam, and I was newly married, just bought a house, right? And was making decent money in the defense industry. Remember, this was during the Gulf War. So and you know what? The company got sold and I was thrown out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. And that was my first realization that, right, you know what? You better care about you first and foremost, because other people don't always have your best interests at heart. And I was crushed at the time because I said that, but you know what? That was the change that I needed to do. And I started my own company at there. And that company has evolved over time, right? Well, in a very short time, it evolved from what was going to be a rep firm to today, what is a design build construction company that has 30 years of weight behind it. But it hasn't always been, easy. Right. There's been tough, lean years. Right. And the data industry has evolved throughout that. Right. And look, and even to this day, I'm not a $1 billion construction company building the data centers for Microsoft. Right. I'm just one of the masses that's still doing it. I do believe I have a vision as to where the future of the data center industry is going. And that is one of my newest ventures, Gray Wolf Data Centers. And I believe that the world requires a decentralized, data sovereign public cloud to compete against the central clouds that that we use. But again, that's getting down the rabbit hole of where we're going from there. But the origin is out of necessity. That's where it was, right? I got laid off and I had to do something, and I worked for other companies while I did it, but I started my own thing that stuck. I realized I could put my head down and do hard work and do something. I remember the first time that I had rolled over and I was, burning it, right? I was doing sales, sales by day, servicing by night, accounting by moonlight, right? And then wake up and doing the same thing day after day. And I rolled over to my then wife and I said, I can't do this anymore. And she looked at me and she goes, well, hire somebody. And it was like, I looked at her like, what's wrong with you? What do you mean hire somebody? And so, but you know what? That's what changed everything. And I realized we have to rely on what we're good at and then, get other people to do the pieces there. But you got to have a vision as to what's the direction that we all want to go so that we're working in lockstep.
Yeah. And I think too, sometimes people get caught up in the, because now you see, and this isn't a, culture or a flame throwing show, but you see people protesting a lot of these things that are data centers and things like that. And I'm not here to make judgment on that, but what I will say is that when certain things are coming down the pipeline, it's very important to put your energy into the right places while doing so. Contrary to popular opinion, you have a lot of data that's already being stored out there as it is already because, you have electronic statements for things. Even the most smallest of businesses are starting to transition to data centers and less filing cabinets.
100%. Look, they're right for yelling. Right. Because right now, the industry is a little bit broken. Right. I mean, and the truth is that, the data center industry is dominated by giant players. We've stopped using million a long time ago to describe them. Right. We've used billion. And by the way, that's given way to now trillion. We have $1 trillion companies. Right. And we're about to move into the era where there's going to be $1 billion companies that actually have less than 100 employees. Right. Because and so I guess my point is my point is right now, the data center industry in the large language models that are being built, the Chat GPTs, the Claudes, the DeepSeeks, the Perplexities, the Google Geminis, right? Those large language models are in behemoth data centers. And that means they use behemoth amounts of power,
Without
right?
question.
And we're running out of those resources in this planet. That is actually what my thesis is in Gray Wolf data centers. Instead of building these giant data centers in one region that just suck all of the resources from that and put the demand on the people in that local community, what we need to do is make many, many more smaller data centers and spread them out over an area. If you will, tile the country with 10 megawatt data centers, not 1,200 megawatt data centers. 10 megawatt data centers, I can tell you right now, with all the retail establishments that close, you could turn them into little tiny data centers and they would serve the purpose, of spreading that load around.
And it would make people feel more comfortable knowing that was running in their local community, right? Because then
100%.
The small business chamber converse.
Look, when you're using AWS right now, AWS tells you that your data is somewhere on the East Coast. That's not sovereign. I don't know exactly where my data is. I'm trusting AWS to keep it secure and to keep it on the East Coast, but I really don't know. I can tell you that some of my biggest customers are people like the DOE, Department of Energy, and the Department of Defense, federal government. That model doesn't work for them. They need sovereignty. They need to know that my data is sitting right there in that facility on that server. It's replicated on those servers over there. And I need to be able to audit that at any time to make sure, because I can't protect what I don't know where it is. Absolutely. And so there's the line in the sand. And I think that's the direction that this technology will take. In fact, I started with superpowers, then I said core values. In there somewhere, we all need to find our purpose. Peter Diamandis calls it his massively transformative purpose, his MTP, massively transformative purpose. And I have found mine. Mine is to live awakened, to champion decentralization, and to cultivate and cultivate transformation, both of self and of the world. But in the technology one, I think decentralization is going to be the key for mankind at this point.
Absolutely.
We need to get rid of centralization.
Do you find that typically what happens is this, people, like, there gets legislation that gets involved and, they're okay, we'll decentralize it. But then the parent company is still one of the larger companies, but they just, so then it becomes, well, we're not really owning it, but they have it, like, capitalism ultimately wins out, right? And I'm not knocking that.
Yep.
But there will come a point where, whether we know it or not, this is just my hypothesis, that they'll do like a Walmart thing where we'll own the smaller company, but we just won't have our name associated with it, so people feel more comfortable with it. That's the possibility, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is, the reason why there's so much fear, right, is that we're in uncharted territory.
That is
we
true.
Have no idea. Here's what we know for certain. That this year will be the year of the forefront of agentic AI, right?
No question.
Previously, pattern recognition, the transformer technologies were just, you prompt it, you got an answer. People are now learning you can do more than just write emails. You can do some research with it. It's pretty smart.
You make a movie.
That's right. You can make a movie. The hallucinations are becoming less and less. You can make citable data, but let's remember that's human data. We wrote that down. It just memorized it and spits it back at us better than what we can do, right? The next one is going to be where it's going to be recursive. It will actually learn and it will actually create its own new data. And that's going to be a moment in time, right? Because that means the machines are going to constantly be able to improve their hardware and constantly be able to improve their software. You and I don't have that luxury, but we don't really operate as a calculator, right? Yes. Way back in our lineage, we were the calculator, right? When we were down on the sand and using a stick to draw a one in the sand, and then we invented the calculator, and then we invented the computer. But perhaps maybe our job was never to be the calculator. Correct. Okay, well then what were we meant to be? Maybe our purpose is to be discerning. We have the ability to make decisions in the absence of data, in the presence of ambiguous data, in the presence of no data at all. Right? We make decisions often by feeling correctly.
Intuition.
Right? Intuition, inspiration, wisdom. Look, I don't want to get too spiritual, but I believe that that is a connection with something far greater than ourselves. I do not believe that we make wise decisions purely based on mind, body, self. I believe we're connecting with something universal, right? But that's the opposite. That's the book that I wrote. You can find it on PeteSacco.com, called The Bridge, where I say that intelligence is paradoxically polar. On one side, you have optimization, perfect machine intelligence, AI. And on the other side, you have discernment, right? It doesn't feel like those two things are connected, but I can tell you they're intrinsically. If you have one without the other, you have an incomplete system.
Right.
But we are going to have the wisdom as to where to point the machines, as to what problems to solve.
Well, I think it's funny because people choose sometimes what they want to embrace, right? So if you have a business, you're like, I can reach customers at a rapid pace that I never have. Let me use this AI agent, but don't take, but now that you actually have a quicker way of actually securing customers, contacts, things of that nature, you should be able to focus more on your core task at hand of what you want to accomplish now that you have more customers and you're not spending 60% of your time soliciting a new customer base.
No, that's exactly right. You got to find what is the most important thing that needs to be done that is going to move your business forward.
Right.
And that's what you need to be focusing, your block of time on.
It can be something so simple as being a plumber, right? Hey, man, I don't have to call every business around town for my plumbing service now. I can just go ahead and have my AI agent, do that. But in the meantime, now you can focus more on your projects at hand, improving your craft. And so those are the things that people need to embrace and say, listen, my time isn't tied up on that. It could automatically pay your invoices.
That's exactly right. Let's get rid of the mundane out of our lives to give us, for what it is that truly drives our passion.
Without question. And so that's one of the reasons why, when you came down the email, I just stopped in my tracks because I'm like, this guy was ahead of the curve. You're talking in the 90s. And when you say you get a chance to hang out with the cool kids are coming back to you. And so I say this because, as a podcast host who gets a chance to talk to the nerd group, right? I was that geek, right? Like I didn't build, successful companies, but I always talked technology and documentaries and how things function and operated. Well, now that's just part of the everyday norm.
Yeah.
Now it's like, you're not, what do you mean you only talk about sports? What do you mean you only talk about movies now? Right. My athletic career is done. So now it's about the knowledge that you obtain on a day-by-day basis that adds value. You can come on thousands of different shows. But the reason maybe you and I connected was because he was like, maybe there's a there that he's got these nuggets that intrigue me enough to want to come on here.
Yeah. You're exactly right. I'm a firm believer that there are no happy accidents in the world, right? If you put it out there and you're honest and you're true as to what your desires are, the universe is going to hand it to you. Now, whether you choose to accept it and do something righteous with it, that's up to the individual, right? I mean, that's the thing, all we can do is, like I said before, right? Probably my greatest realization is the only thing that I can improve in life is me. And I made it as part of my business that when I'm done, right, I want to live. My core values are to live with great presence, right? Mm-hmm. Great purpose and great prosperity. And in the prosperity doesn't mean wealth. It means I want to leave this place a better place than when I found it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And the reason why I do this show is because I want the listeners to understand that you don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the tallest. And in this era of democratization that we talked about, all of the barriers that people thought they had in front of them are completely gone. You're not trying out for the football. The kid that has the 4.4 and you don't, that doesn't matter in this era, right?
Well, that's 100% true. In fact, there's no better time right now to be entrepreneurial than any time in history. Right. The youth of the world right now, they're trying to figure things out. What they don't recognize right now, the Gen Z, right in front of them. And they're going to do more innovation than every subsequent generation did, added together, multiplied by 4, right? Because AI provides agency. And here's what I mean by that. The AI that you get to use every day is exactly the same AI that I get to use, that every government gets to use, that every company gets to use. There's no difference between it. It is a
Right.
level playing form. All right.
Without question.
Now, look, it is going to evolve. Other people are going to train their AI. That's where I think this is going to go. Right now, we've trained all these models on public information. We're going to companies are going to train it on its private information so that their private model knows how their company operates, what's the value that they deliver to their customers, and it is going to help them make their products better. But look, the end game for me is clear of this, right? Let's just take energy, right? Right now, the electric utility is taxed, right? We're putting so many data centers on it, and there's such a strain on it. In what I like to refer to, my sport of choice was football, so everything is going to have a football connotation from here. So, but that we put data centers in the American pro football cities: New York, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, and so on, right? Then the data center operators, the software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, those guys really grew up in, I like to say, the NCAA Division I cities of the world, right? And so they're spread out a little bit farther in these regions. But where I think that we need to go is to repeat exactly what it looked like during the telecommunications era, where you had a point of presence in every high school's football city of the country. That's going to be true distribution. That is true decentralization. And that's where I think we're headed, and so that is going to be, for the better, because we will need to distribute the data everywhere, and it will be performance driven with low latency because it'll be at the edge and it'll spread the resources that are demanded around.
Right. And I'll just say this briefly. I think, not to go in this, too deeply, the educational system is going to have to keep up with this newer technology.
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean,
every business is going to be taxed, right? Because the mundane is going to be removed from it, and it's going to be done agentically or robotically. Look, if we think the world is tenable now, wait until robots appear, and then we have conflicts of is it sentient or is it not sentient, right? Does it have rights like we do? Well, boy, let me tell you, we're going to be in uncharted territory for sure in the next 20 years.
Without question. What just briefly, if you can give a summary, because I want to be very valuable and conscious of your time.
Yep.
Can you give the 30-second summary of the companies that you've founded?
Sure. So absolutely. There's PTS Data Center Solutions, and it operates in 3 divisions. One of them is a company called Intuva that designs and builds data center facilities. Then there's Grid 7, which is the company that builds energy solutions. Yes, for the data centers, right? Remember what I said, we're getting away from centralized electric utility, and many companies right now are using natural gas or gas derivatives or microgrid to bring together multiple energy sources to feed just that building or just that campus. That's going to continue. That's part of the decentralization we're seeing. And then under PTS, I'll have an IT arm, but that's just PTS. Then outside of that, I have Gray Wolf Data Centers, which is the company that I am building right now, that it is my hopes that it will be the world's first franchisor of data center ownership, so that I can put 10 to 30,000 data centers across the country and operate them independently. So not just owned by AWS, not just owned by Google, Microsoft, the US government, so on. Make them owned and independent operated to provide a decentralized platform, maybe operate them on a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, much like blockchain, right? Much like Bitcoin, right? Operate them that way. And that's what I'm doing right now. So it's a combination of behind the meter power plus a data center plus a what's called a multi-compute composable cloud, and then on a federated DAO. And so that is the Gray Wolf Data Center. I also own companies that are very much concerned with intellectual property protection, right?
Again,
when we built all of the GPTs, we basically stole copyrighted information. Well, we're not going backwards. We're not shutting off, Chat GPT tomorrow anytime soon, but let's call it what it is. It stole, intellectual property. I think the new intellectual property laws will be a little bit different as to how we protect our intellectual property. So those are some, and I still stay close to my roots. I still am, this is the one that's outside of AI. I own companies that are around NIL and athletes.
I saw that.
Yeah. And so I've been very involved and very vocal in there because, it's tough. The chance that a high school senior is going to have a 15-year career in any sport is 0.015%. Right. So look, they're making and they're dedicating themselves to that stuff. They should be able to make some wage while doing it. We still need to figure out all the semantics of that, but they have to, because the likelihood of going on to a pro career is less than remote. More, think about it. There's only 27 people that can stand behind the quarterback and actually throw the football down the field, right? And so,
nuts? Yeah.
Last time I looked, there's a lot more doctors in the world.
And trust me, I didn't even make it that far. So, and just briefly, I want to say, because you said
but you had a pretty good career. I followed you online. You had, you put it out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that. I'd rather people talk, good about me than myself. And I just want to say briefly about, when you say the decentralization, that's already ahead of any potential legislation that could come down the pipeline that would want those requirements to be in place in the first place, where it can't be all stored at one central location.
Now, here's the beauty. It isn't going to be us, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be the current administrations. It's not going to be the old guard, right?
Yeah.
This is going to be our children and our children's children. Yeah. They are going to look back at us in these days, and they were going to look at us like we were cavemen. Mm-hmm. They are not going to understand what we're doing to the world and to the self today. They are born of the AI generation, and it can't happen fast enough for the world that they're going to take over. They're never going to have a problem with machines making decisions for mankind, right? No. That machine is going to be far less biased, far more fair, far more equitable. Right. I think that we have nothing to worry about. I want to be the positive voice to say, look, we've always been okay because we are evolving to be a better species. Our origins, we were either the killer or the person being killed. That's not the world we live in today.
That is absolutely correct.
It's not perfect.
Absolutely correct.
We're going to continue to move forward. Why would we think for this time in history, this is the moment where we actually go backwards? It's never happened before. It's not going to happen. The world needs to look at this with wisdom and courage, not with fear and trepidation.
Without question. And I think, where can people find Pete Sacco? For the purpose of the show, clearly not because of me.
PeteSacco.com is probably the easiest place to find it. In there, it's PETE, Joel, it's right on the screen, PETESACCO.com. On there, you'll find links to my books. You'll find links to my Substack, where I prolifically share what I'm writing about and what I'm thinking about. Yeah. I too have a podcast that I do some of them in the data center industry and some of them in the spiritual realm and some just what's going to happen. I'm slated to give a couple different TEDx talks soon, mostly around AI. And the one I'm working on right now is the skill that AI cannot optimize. What I've talked about right now, the difference between discernment and optimization. And so there, and it lists all of my companies, right? So that, but yeah, I'm a technophile, right? I am in there. I love the technology. I love where it's going. I know that it's going to improve society. And so thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you and, and help your watchers and listeners maybe get a little bit of inspiration.
This is at the top of the food chain for me, because the information and the forefront of the technology that scares people. The only thing scarier though is not reaching your full potential, right?
That's it.
Right. And so, this show has allowed me to branch out in ways that I didn't know I was capable of. And I'm eternally grateful for the kind words and the time that you've taken to be on the show. And for people who are listening, don't be scared, embrace and move and make action, because Pete is living proof that the American dream is real and that you need to thrive in this new changing environment.
All right, Rashad, thank you. You're an inspiration. Keep up the good work. If there's anything I could ever do for you, man, you just let me know.
I very much appreciate it. And thank you for your time, sir. Man, that was incredible. That was